Renee's having some problems. Okay, very good. All right, our recording is live here now. We're going to be talking about diversity, I believe. I'm confused between my classes. Is that the topic of the week? Discrimination, I'm sorry. And we'll start by letting Rachel tell us a little bit about herself, and then we'll turn it to, I think, Morgan, and we have the topic lead for the week to know what we're talking about. First, Rachel.
So I hear my 11-month-old in the other room screaming, and I apologize. Just bear with me.
That's okay.
I'm Rachel Griggs. I am the HR specialist at GSW. I've been there almost a year. January will make a year. I graduated from GSW in 2013 with a human resources degree, as Dr. Grimes mentioned. I was an HR intern in the very office that I'm now working in. So we like to keep it all at GSW and just keep it local. So I'm very fortunate to be back at the university. And then I have had positions that specialized in benefits. I have had one other HR coordinator position, and now I landed at GSW where I handle or I sit handling just a little bit of everything right up under Gina, who I'm very fortunate to work under. So I'm happy to be here tonight. Thanks for having me.
Sure. We're glad you landed that sweet gig at GSW.
Me
and
too.
she's also the campus fitness champion. She's encouraging everybody to be part of a walking team as we compete against other schools in the university system, and she's very faithful to remind me every Friday that walking is coming up soon. We've had a couple of Fridays where we walked around campus talking to each other because we're the only ones who showed up.
Dedication.
Dedication, that's right. It's all about the steps. All 10,000. Right. 10,000 a day minimum, absolutely. That goes a lot faster than you think it does, really.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Ashley and Morgan, I believe you've got the lead of the week. So, as you have read about discrimination and affirmative action, tell us what you have found out and why. I don't know whether this is what you picked up on when you were studying, but it includes why we do it and why it started and why it's necessary, whatever. You ladies have it.
Well, as you said, our discussion was about discrimination, but our main focus was affirmative action. And the affirmative action plan is to achieve equal opportunity, especially in the field of employment and higher education. While we were researching affirmative action, we found that there were states that actually banned this plan. California, Washington, Michigan, Nebraska, Arizona, Oklahoma, and Florida were actually the ones that banned it. While we were researching, we come across an article that there were some people. This article stated that some were against the affirmative action because it could actually, it could actually encourage racism in education and government. And then some said that we no longer have racism or sexism. And then the ones that were for the plan say that racism and sexism still exist. And this is where we come up with our questions. Why do you think that the government still believes that the affirmative action plans are still necessary?
All right, Ashley, you want to add anything to it?
Yes. Okay, well, in states where affirmative action was banned in higher education, universities tried about 5 general methods to ensure diversity because it was still important to them. So some things that they tried were creating percentage plans, which guaranteed admission into public universities for, I think it was the top 10% of students in each high school. They added socioeconomic factors into the admissions process. They funded new financial aid programs, improved recruiting and support services for first-generation college students, and dropped legacy preferences. So what we saw was that in 7 out of 10 colleges surveyed, these new methods actually were more effective or just as effective as the affirmative action programs. But when we look at employment, we see that EEOC discrimination suits are being filed more and more every year. They just keep going up. And so About 80% of those claims are found to be without merit, but about 19.2% are found to be with merit, which means that discrimination took place in thousands and thousands of cases. So what I'm kind of gathering from all the information is that there may actually be better methods in education, but in employment, it would be really hard to apply the same methods. So I guess we may have one answer for education and maybe a different answer for employment.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And that gets us into an interesting conversation related to discrimination and affirmative action because, as both of you have just indicated, there's slightly different processes and plans and goals depending on whether we're talking about the workplace or whether we're talking about education. And the first thing that would come to mind to me that I think might be worth exploring is, as Ashley has said, there's been a rise in the number of complaints in the workplace related to discrimination. Why is that? Shouldn't we be at a point in our society where those kinds of things are going away? We might reasonably expect that 50 years ago there were very few complaints because minorities weren't in the workforce. There wasn't anybody to complain. And as the next generation came through, the older baby boomers, part of my generation, yeah, there might have been a lot of grounds for discrimination because we thought the way that we thought, and we were a little bit resistant to people who weren't like us. But as your generation comes into the workforce, you guys have been brought up being kind of everything is beautiful and everybody's valued, and we would think that the younger generations are more inclusive, they're more accepting, they're more tolerant. So why do you suppose that it seems to be that things might even be worse than they've ever been? And Rachel, we normally give them a moment to think, and as they want to jump in with a thought, they usually will click on their little hand there, and Ashley has buzzed in.
So just a thought on that is part of it could be that people are just more educated about their rights and are feeling more empowered to file these lawsuits and make these claims if they feel that they've been treated unjustly.
Okay. There's probably a lot of accuracy to that. Rachel, what are your thoughts? Unmute yourself.
Oh, can you hear me?
Now we're good.
Okay. I heard a screamer, so I want to mute it. I think what is important to note is that when you consider the relation between discrimination and affirmative action, there's a lot of underlying issues there. And I think the issue with what you're going into is that a lot of people see affirmative action as kind of an anti-discrimination in an effort to unjustifiably promote the minorities. So for example, whites, may find it offensive and think that it's anti-discrimination, and that's not the intent of affirmative action. But I do think, especially in our area, that's a lot of the issue with affirmative action is the way people perceive it, and why it still exists in the workforce today, as you were mentioning.
Okay. Let's take a quick aside. Amy, why don't you introduce yourself to Rachel?
Hi, Rachel. I'm Amy Clark. Sorry I'm late, guys. I was just getting off work, but I'm an HR major, and I was expected to graduate this coming semester after summer, but based on class availability, it looks like I'm going to be doing fall of 2017. But that's okay.
All right, let's talk about that offline and see what options you got. Okay. Rachel is the HR specialist at GSW and a graduate of the very program that you're in. So she would have taken current issues as well, probably under Dr. Wilson.
Yep.
All right. So there's kind of a twofold theme of the discussion this week. Part of it is discrimination, which is what started all of the affirmative action. In our note on the announcements on the homepage, it's labeled as discrimination, but the sentence that I gave you to think about is really related to the affirmative action part as a response to discrimination. And the initial question that I asked you was dealing with why it would seem logical that the number of claims of discrimination has gone up when theoretically our society is becoming more tolerant and more accepting. Do you think that that's just a lot of good talking points, or does it accurately describe your generation, that you accept people, you don't judge them as badly as maybe your parents did, my generation did, and that once my generation gets out of the way, discrimination won't be as big a deal because it won't happen as much? This is your chance to kind of bash me and my generation. No points taken off. Anybody? I would bet lots and lots of money that if you went out and surveyed 1,000 people and asked them 2 questions. Question number 1, is society racist? That an awful lot of them would say yes. But question number 2, are you racist? Almost every single one of them would say no. Would you think that would be accurate? Society in general is racist, but I'm not. Kenneth.
Society is racist, and I am a little bit racist, and I will leave it at that.
All right, and I say racist, but I mean sexist and homophobic and all of those things that we're accusing Trump of and whatnot. Society is not very accepting and allowing, but I am. Amy. This is not a political discussion.
Did you say for me to go, sir?
Go ahead. Yes, sir, Amy. Yes, ma'am, Amy.
Yeah, I think society as a whole is racist, but I think that even though sometimes we don't believe necessarily that we are, things that we will say, if we really think about it, it is to a degree a racist comment if we really looked at it. And even though that may not be our intention, when you look at the definition of what it is, that's exactly sometimes what our thoughts and our actions are. But I don't think anybody necessarily always means the harm behind it. It's just that that's just, the nature of how we are at times.
Okay. So maybe the intentions aren't necessarily, but the actions have come out and interpreted that even if they're not intended. All right, Rachel.
I didn't want to get off topic, but just on the note that you were mentioning, Kenneth, that you didn't just mean racism, you meant sexism and everything else. I do think it's important to remember that disabilities are also covered in that case as well, in affirmative action, disabilities and veterans, which disabilities, the ADA is a whole other topic for another night. But I think it's important to remember that without getting too off topic.
Okay, no, that is not off topic at all, because the topic is supposed to be discrimination and affirmative action, and we'll kind of transition between the two now. Discrimination was seen as a huge problem, and to the extent that the government felt like they needed to step in and try to address it and try to force folks to do the right thing. And I think we've mentioned on a couple of calls on a couple of different topics that we find that people with authority have to step in sometimes and force us to do the right thing. And if we just did the right thing to begin with, we wouldn't need nearly as many laws as we have. If we treated people right, if we treated people with respect, if we gave people an honest chance, more often than not, I think people would probably surprise us and things would work out well, but we are very reluctant to do so. So we've instituted affirmative action, which generally only kicks in really in two occasions. The first occasion is that you're a government contractor or a government entity, and then that's the standard. But the other occasion is when the folks that monitor these things seem to think that there is a problem or a potential problem that needs to be addressed. And one thing that we should take into account from the beginning here is that as long as we're doing the right thing, people let us do what we want to do. As long as we're hiring a range of people and we have some diversity and whatnot, people don't try to step in and monitor what we're doing. It's only when there is the appearance of a problem that folks start asking some questions, and when it becomes very, very evident that there probably is a problem, that they start saying, okay, now we're going to have to get you to do certain things to eliminate the problem that we see. And that's where the affirmative action comes in. So what are you reading about as you're preparing for our discussion that affirmative action really does for us? Positives, negatives. And it probably, the likelihood of needing affirmative action probably is greatly a function of the industry that you're in. I would probably suggest, and Rachel could give us some confirmation on this, that higher education probably does not tend to, in terms of hiring, does not tend to have to face affirmative action very often, because it seems like higher education is incredibly diverse already. You look around campus and you see folks that look like everything. There's Asians, there's Middle Easterners, there's Europeans, there's Americans. Just about anything that you can think of, you find in higher education. So it's other kinds of environments. And we're willing to let the silence go for a few moments. Kenneth, thank you.
So are you, I guess, alley-ooping the thought that affirmative action is not needed in schools, or that, well, actually, that affirmative action isn't needed in schools because there is a good enough blend of everybody amongst the student body that it would not continue to be beneficial?
Good point, and I didn't clarify very well. When I was talking about there being a very diverse population education, I'm thinking more faculty. That it's not necessarily students, and so that offers some degree of conversation related to whether it is okay and proper for school admission offices to engage in some sort of affirmative action. I see where Rachel has opened up her mic. Ready to say something?
I didn't mean to interrupt you.
That's all right.
I was just gonna address what Kenneth said, but he was speaking to you, in that I get what you meant is that, like you said, the faculty and staff. If you look at just GSW for an example, if you walk around campus, the faculty and staff group is a very diverse group of people. But we do, as a government contracted institution, we do still have to answer to an affirmative action plan, and our admissions office also does have an affirmative action policy in place as well. So GSW does cover that on both ends, and that's no surprise. As I said, as you walk around campus, we're a very diverse campus, and we should be proud of that.
All right, so let's focus on the student side of things. We can read a lot about how certain schools, in particular, Midwest, Northwest, North Central, are really in the headlines a lot about their admitting practices, and how they're having to set aside certain numbers of admissions decisions for certain groups of people, to the extent that sometimes folks who would have been able to be admitted to that particular school in just about any other year aren't able to, because there just aren't seats. So do you as students see where that is reasonable. And I think I could probably clarify the question a little bit more, but I'd probably be leading you to more towards my opinion on the matter than I need to at this point. Should there be admission standards, and how does that tie into affirmative action? And we'll parallel that. We'll come to Kenneth in just a second. We'll parallel that. If we weren't talking about admissions in colleges, the equivalent would be, we've got a job open, and do we need to hire somebody that has particular skills, or do we need to go look for somebody who has a particular set of characteristics, physical traits? And Kenneth.
In regards to the first question, I'm gonna have to lean on the side of affirmative action. In regards to the second question, it's a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B. I would not want, in regards to the second question, you don't want to just hire somebody because they have a specific background but aren't qualified for the job. It's affirmative action should, I guess in my interpretation of it, should cause you to cast an even wider net to cover an even broader group of people to bring back in as applicants. A, people that actually cut the mustard, and B, they have a background that's a little more diverse than the norm of what you have at your business.
Okay. So if we would prefer to be able in the workplace to hire somebody with the skills, even if they don't have the diversity, why is that different than college? What would we say that affirmative action is good in college, but not necessarily in the workplace?
I wouldn't say that it's not. I wouldn't say that it's bad in, oh goodness. I wouldn't say exactly what you just said without having to figure out a way to say it again, but different. Um, in a college setting, I'm trying not to quote the stuff that I put in my discussion posting, but I guess from what I've seen, you kind of get people that, they have not had they haven't had the same opportunities in life as, let's say, more fluent people have, and to be given an opportunity based on the challenges that they've experienced in life, as long as they meet the general qualifications to participate, I guess it helps out. In regards to business, it all comes back to, if you got 30 Dr. Grimes in an office, and then 30 Dr. Grimes may not be able to see it the way that Kenneth sees it, and then maybe I don't have the same qualification as Dr. Grimes, but I have enough of a qualification to qualify for the job. There's still things from my perspective that I can bring to the table that would make that company a little more competitive in the market, because they're not seeing it from the perspective of 30 Dr. Grimes.
Okay. And I can kind of go along with that, because I can agree that we would never want 30 Dr. Grimeses in anywhere. Rachel.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm sorry. I just wanted to let Kenneth know. I don't know if he directly answered the question about affirmative action, but essentially what he just described in the essence of two identical candidates, not identical, equally eligible. You just described affirmative action, I guess is what I was trying to say. I'm curious if I can ask him a question.
Sure, absolutely.
What, and this is to everyone, what does affirmative action mean to you? If you have, let's just say, a small pool of candidates, you have 5 candidates, different races, ethnicities, all equally, they meet the minimum requirements for the position, for a certain position. What does affirmative action mean to you as far as making the selection for that position? Do you automatically just give it to the most minority person in the group, or what does that mean to each of you?
All right, good question. Let me rephrase that just a bit. You got 5 candidates. Here's the situation. Some of them certainly are more qualified, but all of them meet the basic minimum qualifications. Do you instinctively give it to the least represented in your current work population? Or do you have justification of giving it to somebody who is overrepresented, who might be slightly more qualified? All right, Amy's got her hand up.
Yeah, that's my understanding of affirmative action, is if somebody, that you have a policy, and if somebody is equally qualified, that you would take the person that suffers most from discrimination, that group, and give them the position.
All right, well, let me push it a little bit further here. Let's say that we as the hiring decision makers say, but they're not equally qualified. That this one, you've told us that we've got too many 40-year-old white guys, and we don't disagree. We got a lot of 40-year-old white guys, and we've got an African-American female who's 28 and another 40-year-old white guy, but we would argue to you that the 40-year-old white guy is more qualified than this other candidate. Do we need, according to affirmative action, to go with maybe the slightly less qualified, or maybe in some cases significantly less qualified, if they meet the minimum?
I think if they can eventually bring equal potential to the company. I mean, obviously, with the age variance, they're not going to have the same type of skill sets, because with age you gain experience. But if the younger individual can still bring the same skill sets and still bring equal value to the company, then I would think that with an affirmative defense policy that you would go with that person.
All right. One thing that you mentioned that I wanted to hammer you on for a second here is you talked about potential, and I am in no way required to hire based on potential. I'm expected to hire based upon what they can bring today, and it's a bonus if we get off the chart potential, as long as they can meet the basics of what we need today. All right, so I guess that's part of what affirmative action is sometimes if we're under the magnifying lens, we have to come back off of perfect and be willing to say, you know what, this person is pretty good. Does affirmative action mean that we need to sometimes hire people who are barely qualified, that we have to pass on somebody significantly above minimum and accept somebody who is at least minimum? Is affirmative action ultimately concerned with who we are choosing to hire, or is there some component of it that we are giving consideration, that we're attracting folks? If it is, and I guess the question that I ask here is, can we occasionally go against the we're going to say the underrepresented population if we could demonstrate greater skill with one that we chose, as long as we are considering range, and we're not immediately eliminating them because of certain characteristics. And again, remember that this goes back to the ideas of discrimination, which usually is some intent involved. Can be a byproduct, but we're choosing not to have certain types of people. And I don't know if I've talked around the question 2 or 3 times and it's gotten really cloudy again, but Ashley had her hand up, and then we're going to come to Kenneth.
Okay, I think I'm supposed to go now. You kind of said what I was going to say, which is that my understanding is, kind of like what Kenneth was saying, you want to cast a wide net and you want to get as many qualified, diverse applicants as possible, but you ultimately go with the most qualified person that you can get, no matter what their physical characteristics may be.
Okay, Kenneth.
So I will add on to my earlier definition that I guess my interpretation is in affirmative action, you are giving additional preference to the minorities, or I guess whatever category that your company has decided to focus on. So even though, it may be a Dr. Grimes and there may be a Kenneth who is just basically qualified, I guess my interpretation is that that sounds awful. I get brownie points for being me and having the background and ethnicity that I have, whereas the Dr. Grimes wouldn't get that. And I very well may end up getting hired just because I check a block for the company. But again, that's my interpretation.
Okay. All right. Haven't heard much lately from Connor or Morgan or Renee. Any of you 3 want to throw in some ideas on this? I'm intentionally leading you into some uncomfortable waters here. Connor, Morgan, Renee, anybody?
I think, honestly, the one with more qualifications should be hired.
Okay. One with more qualifications should be hired. Okay. Connor or Renee. Sometimes because I can't see everybody on the screen at this time, sometimes I wonder if you guys are just pulling out and then shut down your camera, going away and making a sandwich or something. Connor.
Yeah. I think you can't focus on the affirmative action that much. If somebody is more qualified, you should get the position to avoid further problems in the future. Is my opinion.
All right, I kind of missed a little bit of that. Did you say that we ought to be able to hire the most qualified even if they're not in the
Yes.
class that we're underrepresented, or that we should try to get the underrepresented?
You should hire the most qualified person to avoid problems in the future.
Okay. All right, Renee, are you out there with any thoughts related to this?
Not yet.
You're not yet out there, or you're not yet at thoughts?
I don't have anything to really say yet.
All right. Ashley.
I just wanted to say that I think it's really interesting that a lot of us have been under the instruction of the same teachers and read probably the same textbooks, and we all have slightly different interpretations of what the law actually asks of us.
Okay. That's a pretty good observation. And I guess that the right answer to the question is to whether you are free to hire who you think is the most qualified, or whether you need to really target the underrepresented population, is a function of what level of involvement the affirmative action is taking in your case. And there are different levels that they can take. There are times when they will get involved and say, there's an appearance that there's a problem you think a little bit more about these I'm going to call them classes. That's not the right word, but hopefully you'll get the understanding of what I'm trying to say here. These demographic populations. There are other times when the affirmative action EEOC folks get involved and they say, no, there's not the appearance of a problem. There is definitely a problem. And in those cases, they're going to say, you can't hire anybody until you get at least 5 more of these kinds of people. And at that point, it's no longer an option of, yeah, they're kind of close, but I really want to go with the one who's a little bit more. When you get to that level of EEO involvement, the hiring decision in a lot of cases has pretty much been removed. So what do you do? If you're at that position where the EEOC looks at you and says, you have got way too many of this kind of person, and how do they come to that conclusion? They look at your community around you. Your community is 50-50 between these two demographic groups, and your population and your employment and your organization is 80-20, there's a problem in there. It's not representative of the community around you. You know, if you're 60-40, you know, there might be. If you're 70-30, there's a pretty good chance that you're making decisions with a very narrow frame of mind. But you start getting 75-25 or 80-20 or something, yeah, there's really a problem, and we've got to do something about it. So if you're in a position where you've got to reduce the discrepancy in the numbers, but you really want to hire the most qualified candidate, what do you do? What do you do? Ashley.
Find other applicants who meet all your specifications.
There you go. If you're asking the question while you're looking at this group of candidates, you're asking the question too late. You can't do anything about the qualifications of the candidates that you already have. But what can you do? Ashley.
Well, you'll want to take a look at your employees, your workforce, and you want to see how the makeup of your workforce, I guess, compares to your community and the qualified people in your community. And if it's not matching up, you need to cast a wider net. You need to have different recruiting practices. You need to go to different places and try different methods so that your workforce is more representative of the diversity in your community.
Very good. And that's the point that I want you to take away from this. If you're looking at your candidate pool trying to resolve affirmative action issues, you've waited too late. If you've got affirmative action issues, you need to be thinking about it in the recruiting stage, not in the hiring stage. Are there, let's go back to the example that you've got a whole bunch of 40-year-old white guys, and you're very underrepresented on females. Are there a lot of females out there who are very highly qualified for the jobs that you have? But they're not applying. You got to get them to apply. Part of the affirmative action process is not just picking the one who fits this group to apply, but going out and proactively trying to find them and getting them to apply so that they're part of the pool. It's a whole lot easier to justify hiring somebody from this particular group if they're already in the pool. And if you know that you're very underrepresented with females or with Asians or with African Americans, you can't just hope that they show up and that one of the ones in the group that shows up is highly qualified. You got to go and find the ones who are highly qualified, even if it means that you got to change the way that you recruit. Because affirmative action ultimately is concerned with who's working for us. But on the basic levels, affirmative action is we're getting enough of a variety of people to looking at us that we've got a lot to choose from. And the bigger the pool, the more likely it is that there are going to be some really outstanding people in that pool who fit those classifications. Rachel, would you agree with that?
Yes. Yes, I would absolutely agree with that.
All right. Again, if you're at the hiring decision, it's too late. You can't do anything about the pool that you got. You can't add to the pool after the fact. So if you know that you need to find some of this group or that group or the other group, you got to bring them into the pool early on. You got to figure out what it is you're looking for. You got to figure out what's a standing candidate, and you got to try to entice those people to come so that you've got the options when it comes time to make the decisions. So in other cases where it's borderline problem, the question would then be, do I prefer, should I hire the perfect candidate or somebody who's pretty close? Should I pass on the perfect candidate from time to time to get somebody who's less than perfect, who helps to balance out the population? And yeah, I think that's probably reasonable. You don't ever want to get in a position where you have to take somebody that you don't think is the right fit. But if you make the right decisions all along, you hopefully never get in that position. So let's take it back into that college admissions. We see a lot in the paper, a lot in the news about campuses across the country that are being told that you've got to set aside a certain number of seats for this group or for that group, whatever that group or this group might be. Is that the way that we ought to do it? Ashley, you've been very active tonight.
I'll take a stab at it. So that might depend on the individual school and if they've shown a history of, discrimination and not being inclusive in the past, if their practices have been questionable, and it might not be good to use that as a blanket policy. It might not be necessary, but in certain cases, maybe it is.
Okay. Let's get much more basic, whether we're talking about school systems, colleges, whatever, or we're talking about businesses. What's the basic goal of any organization, whether it be a school, whether it be a business, a nonprofit? What's the basic goal of any organization? And don't overthink this. What's the basic goal of any organization, Ashley?
Make money.
Okay, for business to make money, right? What about for a university? What's the basic goal of a university?
Educate people.
To educate people, to graduate, work-ready people. What's the basic goal of a nonprofit?
Forward some agenda, meet some goal.
To accomplish some objective, right, Renee?
I was just going to say to be successful.
Absolutely. That's the common thread, isn't it? Doesn't matter what you are. The underlying basic goal of any organization is to be successful at what it is that is your purpose. If you're a business, to make money. If you're a nonprofit, to advance some cause. If you're a university, to educate people and turn out people that are ready for jobs. Your basic purpose is something related to success. What is it that we need to be doing? We need to be doing whatever we can to accomplish that goal. Is that reasonable? If we're a business, we need to be hiring people that are going to help us to accomplish that goal, to make money or to do whatever it is we do. If we're a university, we need to be bringing in students that have a higher likelihood of success because it helps us to meet our mission. So why would we argue? And this may be leading you completely away from where affirmative action wants us to go. This is devil's advocate, which may be wrong. Why, as a university, should we be told that we need to admit people who don't have a high likelihood of success? Because that's not what our mission is. Our mission is not some all-inclusive, give everybody a chance, hope they succeed. Our mission is to turn out people who are ready to go out into the real world. So does telling us that we need to have a certain number of seats set aside for people who might not be as highly likely to succeed take us away from what our mission is? Amy. Microphone.
Sorry, I don't think it would necessarily take away from the mission. I think it would give people an opportunity to get in the school that maybe wouldn't have had the opportunity before, because a university obviously wants the best of the best to get in, and having an affirmative action plan for the university would allow other people an opportunity that could very well be just as successful as the others had they been given an opportunity to get the right education.
All right. We sometimes think that affirmative action exists to force us to take a chance on people because that's fair. In reality, affirmative action exists to give some people who probably would succeed if they had a chance, the chance that they never would have done otherwise. Now, we would certainly be justified in arguing that anytime you force us to do something that goes against the probability of our success, that you're hampering us. And you're really not doing people a whole lot of favor if you force us to put them in a position where they can't succeed. You know, we would argue that sometimes with affirmative action in our workplace, you're forcing us to hire somebody who can't do this job. And why would you force us to put somebody up to fail? But affirmative action doesn't say that we have to hire somebody just because of the color of their skin or their gender or anything like that. Affirmative action still says you've got the right to hire only those people who are qualified. But among those people who are qualified, you got to give extra consideration to folks who are in these groups, as long as they're qualified. With the educational system, we might also argue, all right, you want to go to the University of Michigan, but they haven't been told to set aside a certain number of seats for whatever that you're in. Do you have the right to the school of your choice if you're not one of the more qualified ones to go to that school? Is getting a college education a want or is it a need? What do you think? Is a college education a want or a need? Ken says it's a want. I would suggest that in our society, a college degree or a technical college degree is more of a need. You need that degree in order to get a job. So in general, a university degree is a need, but a university degree from that particular school is a want. Can you get that degree at a different school? Okay, I can't get into the University of Georgia. Could I still get a degree that helps me to accomplish my goal by going to some school other than the University of Georgia? And the answer is yeah, I can get that same degree at a whole bunch of other places. So, affirmative action. Are there downsides to it? Do sometimes we, as the hiring organization, the institution, have to make decisions that we didn't want to make otherwise? Are we sometimes told, more or less, who to accept, who to hire? It's not necessarily what we have chosen if we'd have been free to make whatever decision we wanted. Yeah, that's part of affirmative action. That exists only because we have been presumed or shown to have made some bad choices in the past, or to have made some very, not necessarily bad choices, but some very one-sided choices in the past. Because as a society, we're big on fairness, aren't we? Everybody should have the same chance. Everybody should have the same opportunity. And when we start finding that as a society or as a subset of society that certain groups of people aren't getting the same chances, there's a problem, because that's not who we are. Now, it's incumbent upon me as the organization to give you a chance. but it's incumbent upon you as the potential candidate to make sure that you've done what you need to do to be prepared for that chance. And most of the time, affirmative action is not designed to make me settle for less as the organization. It's to force me to think a little bit differently, to give some folks a chance to succeed. (8:56). We're going to wrap this up here in just a couple of minutes. Need to let Rachel get back to that baby. And we appreciate her taking her time away from her family to do this. And before we kind of wrap this thing all up here, let me say to the 6 of you from the class who are on this call, this is the last call of the semester, and I am so grateful for those of you who have been so faithful to be on these calls. I know that it's not convenient, and you're not taking online classes because you want to set aside every Tuesday to get on an hour-long phone call. But I'm really grateful that you've given me the time that you have, and I hope that there's been some positives in all of this. So what thoughts do you have? We're starting to build some of the ideas for our discussion board, and as I hope, as is normally the case, now our discussion boards can go in a whole lot of different directions as we explore different ideas. And the 6 of you can kind of lead the other 3 towards the conclusions that you want, play devil's advocate from time to time, and ask them questions to get them thinking. What do we need as HR people to take away from this idea about affirmative action? I'm going to let Rachel throw out the initial ideas as we close.
Can you say that one more time? It broke up just a little bit.
All right. What we as HR need to kind of take away in terms of this affirmative action.
I think we need to, the most important thing, as you say, start basic, is understand the definition. And the definition of affirmative action is giving equal opportunities to everyone. That doesn't mean giving unnecessary privilege to anyone. It means giving equal opportunity to everyone. Your topics tonight were discrimination and affirmative action. Discrimination was the purpose of that, or the result of that was making one particular race higher than the others. The purpose of affirmative action is just the opposite, and it's trying to give everyone equal opportunity. So I think it really just comes down to understanding the definition and what it truly means, and that's what it is. Don't try to make it something it's not, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Okay. Good. This all comes out of something called the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, right? That's the whole thing, equal employment opportunity. Everybody should have the same opportunities. And as Rachel says, we're not trying to guarantee equal outcomes. The outcome is up to you, but the opportunity should be there. What you do with that opportunity is beyond my responsibility, but it is my responsibility to make sure you have an opportunity. Affirmative action is very easy to never be an issue whatsoever. If we are very open-minded, if we are very, as a couple of you said, if we're very good at casting a broad net in our recruiting, if we are getting a lot of good people to apply, we've got options to make sure that we stay balanced. Why would we want to stay balanced? Why do we not want a bunch of 40-year-old white guys? I think it might have been Kenneth that said that when we get too many of the same type, we start to get very entrenched in the way that we think. If we don't have a variety of viewpoints because of a variety of cultures, because of a variety of whatever, then we're going to start making bad decisions probably, or predictable decisions. We're not going to grow. So we certainly don't want to make intentional choices that limit us, which is what discrimination is. Excluding people by choice or by regular practice, that's the result. All right, last thoughts. Renee, Morgan, Kenneth, Connor, Amy. What can you do when you get in that HR role, making the decisions? What counsel can you provide your managers, to your administrators, to make sure that you do things the right way and never get in this position where we have to worry about this affirmative action stuff? What can you tell them?
To give everybody an equal opportunity.
Okay? Give everybody an equal opportunity. One thing I would suggest to you is that when you're in a position to hire, that if you look around you and you see a lot of similarity, then you try to find excuses to give people a chance. If you look around you and you see too many guys, you look at your applicant pool and say, are there any girls in there that have some potential? And we talked earlier about how you're not required to hire based upon potential, but are there any girls that are pretty good? And sometimes we have to say no to what's good so that we are available when great comes along. But sometimes it makes sense to say no to great because they're pretty good right here, and there's some advantage to having pretty good sometimes. All right. We'll wrap this thing up, let you get back to your regular schoolwork, get back to your families, whatever the case may be. Again, thank you for your time tonight. We really appreciate Rachel and her giving up her evening for us. And I'll tell you guys that she is a real trooper. She got on a test phone call last night and had some technical problems, and she spent a fair amount of her day-to-day troubleshooting technical issues and making sure that it works, because she really wanted to be on this call with you tonight. So Rachel, we appreciate your dedication and your willingness to share some of your thoughts with folks who are very close on your heels, trying to
Yes.
accomplish what you've done.
Thank you so much for having me. I could talk HR all night, so I enjoyed it.
I'm sure your husband dreads that, talking HR all night.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Well, Rachel, you've been on a call before. You know how to get out of one. Everybody else will just kind of slip out. And again, thank you, everybody, for tonight. You've got a project coming up. And I wrote the final exam today. Nothing you need to study for, just kind of applying some ideas. But that'll be coming up in the next week or so. Not the next week. The week after Thanksgiving. How about that? Oh, and if any of you haven't done the evals yet, go get them done. I think there was only one person that hasn't done it, but I don't know who it is because I haven't looked at the Dropbox yet. Good night.